The clatter of metal on stone snapped her from her thoughts. The keys had landed on the marble counter with a careless flick of the millionaire's wrist, glinting under the chandelier's light. She had seen them before, polished chrome dangling with the golden emblem of his prized Lamborghini, but never this close, never so within reach. Usually, they were locked away in a drawer or slipped into his jacket. Tonight, he tossed them aside without thought, striding out of the room to take a call, his voice sharp and impatient. She returned to folding linens, willing herself not to look at the keys again, but the sound of crying cut through the silence. It wasn't the usual soft wail that lulled quickly into hiccups. This was frantic, gasping, urgent. Her heart jolted. She dropped the linens and hurried up the staircase, the grand banister cold against her hand as she pulled herself 2 steps at a time. In the nursery, the millionaire's infant son thrashed against his blankets, cheeks flushed a deep crimson. The cries shook his tiny chest, rattling, desperate, unlike anything she had heard before. She scooped him up, rocking gently, whispering soothing words, but his skin burned under her touch. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Her eyes darted around the room. She searched for medicine, instructions, anything to guide her. Nothing. The shelves were lined with designer toys, porcelain figurines, expensive books, but not a single bottle of fever reducer, not even a thermometer. She pulled open drawers, finding only more spotless clothes folded in perfect stacks. She called out, her voice carrying down the empty hall. No answer. The house was silent but for the child's piercing cries. Panic pressed against her chest, heavy and unrelenting. The gates outside were always locked, tall and iron, impossible to climb. She had no car of her own, no way to leave. Her phone was dead from the long shift, and the landline downstairs was disconnected for renovations. She was trapped in the opulence of a house designed to impress, not to protect. Her mind returned to the keys, the ones glinting on the marble counter. The Lamborghini was parked in the garage, always gleaming, always guarded. She had never been allowed near it, only dusting its cover from a distance. But it was a car, and it could move. That was all that mattered now. She carried the baby down the stairs, each sob stabbing at her resolve. His small body trembled, breaths hitching, as if every cry was a fight to stay alive. She paused at the threshold of the kitchen, staring at the counter. The keys lay there, silent and accusing. Her hand shook as she reached for them. She thought of her job, her future, the wrath of the man who employed her. She thought of police reports, of accusations, of how quickly the word theft could erase every truth. Then the baby whimpered, weaker this time, and her hesitation dissolved. She grabbed the keys, clutched them tight, and whispered a promise to the child pressed against her shoulder. Whatever came next, whatever punishment awaited, she would face it, because in this house of wealth and rule, she was the only one who had heard his cries. The baby's body burned against her chest like a small furnace. His cries weren't just loud, they were jagged, broken by gasps, as though each breath had to claw its way out of his lungs. She shifted him higher, pressing his damp cheek against her shoulder, and panic gripped her with icy hands. This wasn't ordinary crying. Something was wrong. She hurried to the dresser, yanking open drawers, hoping for a bottle of medicine, a set of instructions, anything. All she found were layers of perfectly folded clothes, tiny shoes lined up like ornaments, and empty packages of toys never opened. The shelves, too, looked full but hollow. Rows of books with gilded spines, plush animals that had never been hugged, not one practical item to help a child through sickness. She darted to the bathroom, flicking on the light with her elbow as she held the child. Cabinet doors slammed open, revealing marble counters and luxury soaps, but no thermometer, no medicine, not even a bandage. She stared at the empty space for too long before the baby's shuddering whimper pulled her back. The house itself felt heavier, pressing down with its silence. She called out the millionaire's name, her voice echoing through the high ceilings. No answer. The staff had left hours ago, retreating to their own corners of the estate. She tried again, louder this time, but her words came back to her like a taunt. He was gone, out at a gala or a meeting, unreachable. She pressed her palm gently against the baby's forehead and winced. The heat was fierce, unnatural. She remembered her own brother when he was small, how her mother had recognized a fever that high as dangerous, life-threatening if not treated. Her chest tightened. Every second wasted here was another second stolen from this child's fragile body. She paced, rocking him, whispering soothing words even as her own heart pounded. She tried to think clearly, to map out options. There was no medicine, no reachable doctor, no way through the locked gates. Her phone sat dead on her nightstand in the maid's quarters. She felt as trapped as the child, caught in a gilded cage designed for show rather than survival. The boy coughed weakly against her shoulder, a tiny, rasping sound that cut her deeper than any insult ever had. She looked toward the staircase, her mind pulling her back to the image of the keys glinting on the marble counter. Her gaze lingered on the memory, her body trembling between fear and resolve. The rules screamed at her to wait, to stay in her place, but the baby's shallow breaths left her no choice. She kissed his hot forehead and whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. If no one else would act, she would. Her feet hit the polished floor hard as she raced toward the front door, the baby pressed tight against her chest. His cries had grown weaker, a thin rasp that scraped the air rather than filled it. She yanked the heavy door open, cold night air rushing inside, only to be met with the sight she dreaded most. Beyond the manicured hedges, the estate's towering iron gates stood sealed shut, their black bars stretching high like the ribs of a cage. The keypad beside the stone pillar blinked red, mocking her. She didn't know the codes. Only the millionaire did. She stepped onto the porch, shifting the baby in her arms, and scanned the vast drive. No staff cars lingered. No guard waited by the gate. She shouted once into the night, her voice breaking, but the wind carried nothing back. The world outside the gates felt close enough to touch, yet impossibly far away, and every second lost here was another second of the child's fever climbing higher. Her mind raced, flipping through impossible choices. She could scream until her voice gave out, though no one would hear over the long stretch of private land. She could try to climb the gate, but it was designed to repel, its spikes gleaming sharp under the moonlight. Even if she managed, what then? She could not scale it with a sick infant clutched in her arms. Her breath came fast, fogging in the cool night. She turned back toward the garage almost without realizing. The thought had already taken root. Wild and dangerous. The Lamborghini. She had seen it countless times when dusting the outer walls of the garage, its silver curves tucked under custom covers, its presence as much a boast as a machine. It was a symbol of wealth, a toy for display. But tonight it was something else. It was the only vehicle in reach, the only chance to cut through the night and reach help before the child's small body gave out. Her steps quickened as the idea solidified. She pushed the front door closed with her shoulder and crossed the echoing hall, the baby whimpering against her. Down the back stairs, through the service corridor, until the scent of polish and gasoline told her she was near. The garage door loomed tall, and in the faint light she saw the machine itself, uncovered, gleaming as though waiting. The reflection of the chandelier above curved across its hood like liquid fire. She shifted the baby to her other arm, staring at the car as though it might leap forward of its own will. The keys weighed heavy in her pocket, far heavier than metal should. The decision pressed down on her, filled with consequences she could already see. The accusations, the fury, the ruin of her own life. But the baby whimpered again, his body hot against her, and she no longer cared about her future. Her only thought was the next breath he needed, the doctor's hands that had to reach him before it was too late. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she touched the sleek curve of the door handle. For the first time, the forbidden vehicle was not his trophy. It was her only hope. Her hands hovered over the keys as though they burned. Every instinct told her to leave them, to step back, to remember her place. She could already picture the aftermath. The millionaire storming into the kitchen, discovering the missing car, summoning the police, theft, charges, humiliation. Her life could end here in a way that had nothing to do with the baby's fever. But the sound behind her wasn't just crying anymore. It was weaker now, shallow and strained, each gasp rattling the boy's tiny frame. Time was shrinking. Her fingers curled around the keys before she had fully decided. The cold metal pressed into her palm, and with it came a surge of fear, then resolve. She whispered a prayer under her breath as she shifted the child higher in her arms and hurried through the wide halls. The echo of her footsteps filled the mansion, a sound that felt louder than it should. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, portraits stared down with their painted judgment, and she ignored them all. In the garage, the Lamborghini gleamed like a predator crouched in the shadows. Its silver curves caught the light, almost taunting her. She had never touched it before, had never even been allowed near it. Now she yanked the door open with trembling hands, fumbling to settle the baby in the leather passenger seat. She didn't have a car seat, didn't have belts or cushions, only the fabric of her apron and the strength of her arms. She secured him as best she could, whispering apologies with each rushed movement. His small face turned toward her, eyes glassy, breath shallow. Sliding into the driver's seat, she gripped the steering wheel. The leather was cool and smooth, wrapping around her hands like temptation itself. Her pulse hammered in her ears. For a brief second, she hesitated again. This wasn't her world. She wasn't meant to sit here. She wasn't meant to hear the hum of power waiting under the hood. But then she looked at the baby. His lips parted in another broken cry, weaker than before, and she turned the key. The engine roared to life with a thunderous growl that shook the garage. The sound reverberated through the silent mansion, filling every corner with its defiance. She flinched, half expecting guards or neighbors to appear, half expecting the millionaire himself to materialize and drag her out by her collar. But no one came. It was just her, the baby, and the car that was no longer his symbol of power, but her only hope of salvation. She pressed her foot gently on the pedal, the machine jerking forward with more force than she anticipated. Her breath caught, but she steadied herself, whispering, "Hold on, little one. Just a little longer." The gates outside were still locked, but she had already decided nothing would keep her from breaking through if it came to that. Tonight, she wasn't just a maid. Tonight, she was the only lifeline this child had, and she would carry him to safety even if the world collapsed around her. The tires screeched against the pavement as she shot out of the driveway, the iron gates shuddering from the force of her desperate push. The Lamborghini roared like a beast unchained, its headlights cutting through the dark as if they alone could carve a path to salvation. She gripped the wheel with both hands, her knuckles white, her heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the engine for moments at a time. In the back seat, the baby whimpered weakly, his tiny voice fragile against the thunder outside. Streetlights whipped past in glowing streaks, yellow and white blending into a blur. She leaned forward, eyes wide, scanning every intersection with frantic precision. She ignored the horns that blared when she surged through red lights, ignored the curses that followed her from drivers swerving to avoid her. Every second mattered, and hesitation was a luxury she could not afford. The car felt alive beneath her, far more powerful than anything she had ever touched. It fought her grip on every turn, eager to leap forward faster than her nerves could handle. Sweat ran down her forehead, her palms slick, but she refused to let go. She muttered to herself, voice low and urgent, promising the baby they would make it, promising herself that fear would not win tonight. At a stop sign, a man crossing the street froze, his groceries tumbling from his arms as he stared at the silver machine tearing past him. She caught the flash of his shocked face in the mirror, but it meant nothing. The only image that mattered was the child in the back, cheeks still flushed, breath still shallow. She checked him through the mirror every chance she got, each small movement a reminder that she was racing against something invisible and merciless. Her chest tightened as she approached the highway. She pressed harder on the pedal, the car leaping forward as though it had been waiting all night for someone daring enough to unleash it. The lanes blurred, the signs whizzing past too quickly to read. Cars honked and pulled aside as she cut through them, some drivers staring, some pointing, their faces lit briefly in her mirrors like ghosts watching her madness. She didn't care. If anyone remembered her face, it would be as the woman who risked everything to save a child. The hospital lights finally appeared in the distance, glowing like a beacon against the night. Relief nearly stole her breath, but she held it together, focusing on the road until she reached the emergency entrance. Her foot slammed on the brakes, the car skidding with a violent squeal before stopping inches from the bay doors. She scrambled out, scooping the baby into her arms. The engine still purred behind her, a symbol of recklessness and defiance, but she no longer cared about the car, the keys, or the punishment waiting for her. All she cared about was the limp child pressed against her chest and the doctors rushing forward to take him inside. Her legs buckled with exhaustion, but her spirit held firm. She had broken every rule tonight, driven faster and harder than fear itself, and nothing, not even the wrath of the man who owned that car, could matter more than the fragile breaths she had fought to protect. The Lamborghini skidded to a halt with a shriek of rubber, the nose of the car jerking just short of the emergency bay doors. The scent of smoke and burning brakes filled the air as she slammed the gear into park, fumbling with the handle before throwing herself out of the driver's seat. She hardly noticed the sharp intake of breath from two nurses standing nearby. All they saw was a maid in her uniform, apron streaked, hair loose around her face, climbing out of a Millionaire's prize machine like it was nothing more than a taxi. She yanked the passenger door open and scooped the baby into her arms, cradling his limp body as her voice broke. "Please, please, he's burning, he can't breathe." The words tumbled out in a rush, her eyes wide, desperation spilling out faster than air from her lungs. Doctors and nurses rushed forward, some frozen for a second at the sheer absurdity of the image, a housemaid stepping out of luxury to deliver a child at the brink. But judgment dissolved the moment they saw the baby's flushed face, his chest rising and falling, too shallow, too weak. Hands reached for him, and she thrust the child forward without hesitation, every fiber of her body screaming to hold on, yet knowing she couldn't help him anymore. She pressed the boy into the arms of a doctor, her voice cracking as she begged, "Do something, save him, don't let him," the rest caught in her throat, choked down by terror. The baby disappeared into a blur of white coats and wheeled gurneys, the sliding doors hissing open as the medical team rushed inside. She followed to the threshold, only to be halted by a nurse gently pressing her back. "We've got him now. You did the right thing. Stay here." The words washed over her, but they barely registered. Her body trembled with adrenaline, her arms empty, her mind still filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. Behind her, voices rose. Orderlies muttered about the car parked crooked across the ambulance lane. A security guard glanced at the Lamborghini, then at her uniform, suspicion already forming in his eyes. She stood frozen between their whispers and the sliding doors that had swallowed the child. She couldn't explain, couldn't defend herself. Not yet. None of it mattered, compared to whether he would make it. People passed, some staring, some whispering, but she only stared at the small glimpse of the hospital corridor beyond the glass. For the first time all night, her knees weakened, and she pressed her back against the cold wall outside, trying to steady her breathing. She had risked everything, broken every rule and crossed every line. The only thought anchoring her was the sight of the baby being carried away by steady hands. For now, that was enough. The screech of tires outside the hospital entrance drew attention long before the millionaire strode in, his polished shoes striking the tile with fury. His eyes locked immediately on the Lamborghini parked crooked across the emergency bay, a spectacle of wealth turned shame. His voice cut through the waiting room like a whip, demanding to know who had touched his car, who had dared. Staff glanced at each other nervously, the whispers already spreading faster than his accusations. He stormed past the counter, shoulders squared, ready to unleash his wrath, but then he caught sight of a small figure down the corridor. His child lay in a hospital crib, an oxygen mask resting gently over tiny lips, monitors blinking steady. A nurse adjusted the IV with calm hands, another scribbled notes on a chart. The color had returned faintly to the baby's cheeks. Relief softened the father's anger for a heartbeat, confusion crashing into him with unexpected force. When he demanded answers, the truth came out in low, steady voices. The staff recounted what they had seen the maid rushing in, frantic but determined, carrying the boy whose fever had nearly overtaken him. How she had pulled up in his Lamborghini, apron-stained, hair disheveled, no care for appearances, only urgency. How she had begged them to save the child, her own fear second to his life. The word stole echoed in his ears, but so did another word, saved. He faltered, his fury unraveling in front of witnesses. For the first time in years, his power did not command the room. Instead, all eyes turned to the quiet figure standing near the vending machine, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, her uniform wrinkled and damp from sweat. She did not speak, did not defend herself. She only kept her gaze fixed on the window of the nursery as though she could will the baby to grow stronger with her presence alone. The whispers spread beyond the hospital walls, carried by orderlies, by patients, by those who had seen the impossible pairing of luxury and desperation collide. A story began to form, one that could not be hidden. A maid had stolen a millionaire's Lamborghini, but not for greed, not for glory. She had taken it because no one else had heard a child's fading cries. Because she chose action when silence would have been safer. By morning, the story found its way into headlines. Neighbors argued over her fate, some calling for punishment, others calling her a hero. Journalists circled the estate, snapping photos of the iron gates that had once kept her trapped. The millionaire tried to contain it, tried to silence the narrative, but the truth had already broken free. She returned to work in silence, her movements as steady as before, yet everything had changed. She no longer walked as unseen background. She carried herself with the quiet knowledge that in one desperate night, she had done more than anyone else in that house ever had. She had saved a life, and in doing so, etched her name into a story no amount of wealth could erase. What began as desperation had become something larger, a legend of courage whispered in kitchens, echoed in hospital halls, and carried far beyond the mansion's locked gates.